I'm Yorke Phillips, host of This Must Be the Gig. We're a weekly podcast that documents everything about the world of live music, speaking with choreographers, costume and set designers, the people who run beloved venues and festivals, and, of course, speaking with musicians about that one gig that changed their lives. Get your peek behind the curtain at consequenceofsound.net, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Consequence Podcast Network.
And welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith With. It's an audio interview series presented by WFPK Independent Louisville at WFPK.org. Consequence of Sound and the Consequence Podcast Network. If you're not a subscriber to the series, take that moment, hit that subscribe button before we jump into this. Before we jump into one of my all-time favorite interviews, you can subscribe anywhere you get your favorite podcasts from. That includes iTunes and Apple Podcast and Spotify and YouTube. So hit that button and keep up with us and the multiple interviews we put out every single week. I'm Kyle Meredith. Today, my guest is Ian Astbury of The Cult. I just said this ended up being one of my all-time favorite interviews. One, because The Cult is one of my all-time favorite bands, and getting to talk to Ian not just about his music, but specifically about the album Sonic Temple that came out 30 years ago this year. It came out in 1989, and we get to take not just a deep dive into the songs, but the influences that go beyond musical influences that all wrap around to make up the, as Ian says, the musical DNA of this record. And that includes talking about songs like Firewoman and Sweet Soul Sister and Wake Up Time for Freedom, as well as a bit like New York City, not just a song title on the record, but a place on the globe that was a very big influence on Ian and the band at the time. There was talk of painters and filmmakers and poets and writers, and the timeline stretches from the very early days to the very present we're in as the band embarks on sold out after sold out shows, not only in celebration of this record, but all of their music. Without further ado, it's Kyle Meredith with The Cult.
Hi, Kyle. This is Ian Astbury calling.
Let's see. 30 years of Sonic Temple. It's about to get its big box set release and the ongoing tour along with this. 1989, man. This is quite a while ago. I guess you've had to jump back in this record to get ready for the tour, right?
To a degree. I mean, we have been playing some of the songs since they were recorded. There's probably like maybe 2 or 3 that we haven't played in our set. And we've definitely pulled songs out for a while. We pulled out songs like Firewoman, retired them for a couple of years. Songs like Edie, we retired for a few years just to try and keep it fresh, you know. But the intention of this was really, it was kind of twofold. One is that I think at the very core, The Cult is a live performance-driven band. And we really grew up coming out of club scene into, you know, post-punk, post-modern alternative period, into kind of evolved into a, you know, went through a phase of, I wouldn't say it was a phase, DNA of, you know, psychedelic and harder rock music, blues-based rock music, and then back into sort of postmodern, meandering into that. So we've kind of, you know, meandered through the past 30 years, and the intention of this was to continue that as a live band. That's what our principal function is in many ways, and everything that, you know, implies. And then the other idea was that Beggars Banquet, who are a mother record label in the UK, you know, they wanted to do a reissue of the album. And I've never been a great nostalgist or a great celebrator of anniversaries. I mean, I think this is the very first time that The Cult as an entity has come out and said, we're supporting, acknowledging 30 years of this band, you know, for the first time. And in some ways, we wanted to use Sonic Temple as a platform to link to the DNA of The Cult. You know, it's a very, very important record in The Cult's canon, and we wanted to acknowledge not only the songs on that record, but the influences and how they've kind of continued throughout the last whatever amount of years it's been. I'm not keeping count.
I'm glad you did. I'm glad you are taking that moment too, because it isn't just one of the most important in your own catalog. I think this is one of the most important records of the 80s, and it did show, and I should say beyond the 80s, just the fact that it came out in the 80s. But because of what you were saying there, you all had done so many different styles leading into this record, and maybe this, yes, as it's been written, was one of the first times you sort of doubled down, because electric, I guess, had kind of started in that direction. Not that the two records sound alike, but it kind of was the first time you said, all right, let's go further that direction. Why was that?
I think it was just a desire to continue to grow, to not repeat ourselves. That was very important. And also to really kind of explore guitar-based, guitar-driven record, explore that side of ourselves a little bit more, because it was something that was really blossoming in our live sets. You know, we kind of, when we first started out, we had pretty much two drum beats, a tribal beat and a four and a floor beat, you know, like everybody else at the time, because we all came out of punk rock. Nobody could play, and that was a very easy beat to play.
Right.
And everything was derivative of, I guess, you know, Peter Hook, because he wrote these incredible melodies in Joy Division, and everybody was like, look at what they did. You know, we can apply that to what we do. So we kind of evolved out of that. And at that time, you know, if you look at the images or you know anything about the band, Sudden Death Cult, Theater of Hate, that period, it was a really interesting time. It was almost like, you know, Britain was in a political upheaval. You know, the campaign for nuclear disarmament was in full swing. It was just pre-1984. It was just pre-Orwellian. You know, there was a band called Crass who were doing a countdown every album. They would do, you know, like 4 years to 1984, 3 years to 1984, and then they split up in 1984, kind of signifying in many ways that 1984 was year zero. You know, it was like the end of the 20th century and kind of the beginning of the 21st century. So I guess in some ways, seeing a lot of this culture was being discarded after the post-punk and punk movement, which kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater in many ways. You know, like blues music kind of went away for a minute and as a major influence in rock music, and something was all very important to me. And we wanted to incorporate that more into it. And plus the psychedelic influences, you know, psychedelic in the broadest terms, everything from Pink Floyd to even the Gun Club, you know, who were sort of had a psychedelic, certainly a desert peyote essence, you know, what Jeffrey was conjuring up. So we were just making it up as we went along. There was no rules. And when people told us there was rules, it's like, absolutely not. I mean, when we made the transition from Death Cult to the Cult, people were like, what are you guys doing? It was like, we're done with that. That's finished. We've done it. And the whole movement was kind of, it was fizzling out. And there was so much more happening. MTV was coming up. And 1984 was the year that Ridley Scott did the Olympic commercial with a girl throwing a javelin. You know, it was very Orwellian, dystopian, you know, people at a desk and this javelin. And we arrived at LA in 1984, the opening day of the Olympics. So it's kind of like the beginning of Apple, beginning of computers, the beginning, we could sort of see the 21st century coming. And the 60s seemed so far away, and it was such a taboo to dive into 60s music. But there were these kind of fringe clubs in London where everybody would gather. And I mean everybody. You'd see like everybody from, you know, Jeffrey Lee Pierce to Blixa Bargeld to Susie Sue to Robert Smith. They all played this club called Alice in Wonderland, which was a psychedelic rock club. And all they played was everything probably like, I want to say 65 through 71. But it was really choice psychedelic cuts, like a lot of great British bands. I mean, what Nick Mason is doing right now with Saucer Full of Secrets was kind of the essence of the club. And it was an incredible energy because it was like so unlike anything else that was happening in art and music at that time, because it wasn't so much revisionist. It was just like, I guess, the archetypal elements of, you know, the late 60s and the early 70s rock bands. What they seemed to be much more connected to the soil and the ether. You know, the information was coming in through different channels. It wasn't coming through the internet. It wasn't coming through their phones. You had to actually go out and experience it. Like a lot of the songs were written through travel. You'd go to a place and then you'd be inspired. And, you know, you weren't sitting at home imagining what it'd be like through a book or a computer. You know, you go see it through your own eyes. And I think it was just a continuation for the cult. So, yeah, I mean, I was always pushing for something new, something different, something fresh. And Sonic Temple was a moment where I guess a lot of things converged, a lot of influences converged. And, you know, we were very aware of what was happening in Seattle. We'd had a relationship with Seattle since like 85, 86. We played the Paramount Theater in Seattle. Seashell Sanctuary was a top 40 hit in Seattle, which was strange because the rest of the country it wasn't. It's more of a college situation, college radio, and like people like K-Rock were playing it. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot in it. There's a lot in it.
So I was going to kind of seg there for a second, too, because Firewoman ended up in the movie Singles, you know, based in Seattle with Cameron Crowe there. So genre, as we're kind of hitting around here, was really important back then. We talk about it differently today than we did back then. Like when you in the fan scene, you were either a punk or a metalhead or a goth or, you know, an alternative, whatever.
It was far more niche.
Right.
It was far more niche.
But the cult seemed to be the bridge to do, you know, be on tour with Metallica and also to be accepted by the Seattle guys, you know, in this coming of age movie that's meant a lot to that scene too. I mean, what did that look like to you at that moment? Did you see it like that?
It was kind of strange because we, like I said, you know, coming through post-punk punk scene, you're coming more out of an urban environment. I mean, we came out of London. The band was formed in Brixton. You know, our neighbor Nick Cave lived around the corner. You know, the Clash lived close. Cosmo Vinyl, the guys who worked with the Clash and Flea, the Road Crew, they all lived in proximity to where we lived. You know, so I don't think we were that self-conscious. It was really more about like discovering the new music that was coming up and just really fans. I mean, going to see bands play, like seeing Soundgarden at the Lingerie in 1988 or seeing Mother Love Bone before they came Pearl Jam, got close to Andrew, got close to Chris Cornell. Seeing those guys, and they had very similar ideology. I mean, you know, it would have been very interesting to see what would happen with Mother Love Bone had they continued with Andrew, because they were way more glam. I mean, they were... We saw them opening for Dogs the More. You know, they were like really glam rock. I mean, it was more like T-Rex. It was more like Freddie Mercury. You know, like Queen mixed with punk. I mean, it was very interesting music, and it was so incredibly exciting and dangerous. You know, because you go out in the street dressed in your finery, you're an immediate target for, you know, any kind of negative attention. So, I mean, we were traveling all over the world as well. So, plus our history, our lineage, Southern Deathcore, I was opening for the Clash, Bauhaus. You know, we did shows with New Order, festivals with Nick Cave on the bill, Gun Club was on the bill, you know, and then it just kind of evolved. The scene kind of evolved. It kind of, I think psychedelic music, psychedelic rock, probably the Doors was a very important connected tissue, because the Doors really you talk about a bridge. The Doors really had everything in there. They had like hard blues. They had, you know, at times it could be hard rock and, you know, folk, Spanish, flamenco. You know, classical, jazz. I mean, with so many, you know, some of the songs were very brutal, completely brutal, pagan, primal. And then some of the songs were incredibly sophisticated. And then they have moments of absolute beatific. You know, they really reached the zenith. They did grab the sun, you know. And that, I think they were such an important band. I know in Liverpool in 1980, one of the bands that was most influential, and you could see that in like Echo and the Bunnymen, for example. Right.
Yeah, of course.
And Teardrop Explodes was the Doors. The Doors were a very, very important band in 1980, post-apocalypse now. So, you know, that was kind of an indicator, I think, for a lot of where we were going, because we were kind of like, I guess the guidebooks were the biographies that were written. And meeting people in the flesh. I mean, we opened for Iggy Pop in, I don't know, 86, 87. Then we went and opened for Bowie, and then we did a tour with GNR opening for us, and that was an incredible year for you know, talk about diverse, crisscrossing genres. I think it really changed when MTV decided to come up with 120 Minutes, Headbangers Ball, Yo MTV Raps. They really began to segregate the genres, which wasn't the truth, because when we were making Electric with Rick Rubin, we were immersed in the Def Jam world, in their universe, you know, and we're always hanging out with whomever was around, you know, like meeting LL Cool J when he was 19, or, you know, hanging out with the Beasties, or just being around hip-hop and rock were way more together. In fact, the Cult, I think 3 years ago, we did a couple of shows with Public Enemy, which really, to me, made a lot of sense. But I think it's just really, ultimately, probably the bonding factor is fans of music, you know. And then somebody says, well, actually, you have your own fans. You'd be like, what? How's that possible? I'm busy focused on getting the music, going to the shows. I mean, I still have a voracious appetite to discover new music. It's just what's in the day, you know. That's what gets me out of bed, is when you hear an artist who's really engaged in their craft, and they're doing it in a fully focused, fully realized way, you know, with no apparent agenda other than to make an excellent piece of work. And I don't know what the inspiration there. For example, you know, Thom Yorke's Anima, which I love. I think it's a genius. He is a brilliant man, an incredibly sensitive man, and admire him greatly. There's so many great records have been made, like that. You know, Tyler's Igor, brilliant. You know, Billie Eilish is amazing. You know, there's so many incredible artists right now. Like, we were them at some point in our career. We were like, you know, teens, evolving into young men, evolving into, you know, adult males. And we grew up on the road, traveling around capital cities throughout the world, and by the time we were 25 or 26, we were pretty burnt, and we were reading, No One Here Gets Out Alive, which is one of the Bibles that were floating around, and then eventually getting to meet Danny Sugarman and be immersed in the world of the Doors with Manzarek and Krieger, and then going forward. But in many ways, that record was kind of like the tent pole that connected so many different areas, which was evident when we did Gathering of the Tribes, because that was kind of like an opportunity for me to say, here's some context as to where I think it's at. And a lot of people seem to agree with it, perhaps not consciously, but certainly in terms of the energy of what we were trying to create with Gathering of the Tribes. In many ways, it was a window, again, a gateway into the 21st century. So.
And you nailed it. I mean, it was perfectly on the spot. Everybody that was a part of that.
It was an amazing, very quickly, because I came up with the idea in Rapid City, South Dakota. We were opening for Metallica. Out of that, and a love affair with indigenous American culture, and what was happening in the media. MTV, Life magazine had just done a piece on what subculture is going to look like going into the 1990s. They were telling us, the marketers were telling us what it's going to be like. We were no longer telling people what it was going to be like, the audience. And we were being told. I mean, the advertising agencies and the marketers and the A&R people have got incredibly sophisticated. They became embedded with artists, and they began to influence, almost like Jesuits or something. They came into these communities of like raw creatives and started to influence their commercial doctrine, and kind of saw it coming. It felt very Machiavellian and sinister, and what MTV were trying to do, to cut up. Like, you're getting segregated now. Yo, MTV Raps and 120-minute, Headbangers Ball. You guys are separate. It's like, well, wait a minute, we're not.
Right.
We're not separate. We're all the same age. We may come from different backgrounds or different environments, but we've definitely got a lot in common with each other. So I saw that coming, and I was like, that doesn't feel right. That we have to kind of grab our community back, our musical community. And of course, inspired by so many things. Going to Live Aid was a huge inspiration in 1985. Being at Live Aid, sitting between Bob Geldof and Billy Connolly when Queen were on stage in one of the boxes overlooking the stadium. How can that not be an influence on a 24-year-old, 25-year-old kid? Actually, no, I was young. I was 23. I mean, that blew my mind. I could never seen anything like that before. The response, the audience response, the visceral energy was just profound. And the unity and the sense of shared cause, cause, C-A-U-S-E, not cause the artist, K-A-W-S. Yeah, but, it's hard to kind of put into, one of the things for the cult is it's always been, people sit down and go like, you guys are full of contradictions. And go like, yeah, I guess we are. It's like, yeah, constantly. I love that. There's a great interview with David Bowie where the interviewer says, I think it might be Russell Hart, he says to him, isn't that pretentious? And Bowie just turned around and goes like, I've always been pretentious, darling, And that was the kind of attitude. It's like, yeah, it's contradictory. We are contradictory. We're not doing it as a shtick. There's an absolute sincere passion for music and culture and film and art and photography and acting and all the crafts, all the visual arts, painting. There's a convergence of energy. We came of age at a time when we went to New York in '84 when Warhol and Basquiat were still active, and we dropped into that. The first gig we played in New York was at the Danceteria, and it was a Puerto Rican dance night, a Puerto Rican party, and there was all these Puerto Rican kids staring at us going like, what is this? This isn't our music. And we were like, sorry, we got booked this night. This is it. But it was amazing to be immersed into that, into that diversity, into that, how complex it became in terms of cultural diverse images. And I was always breaking off to try and see artists like John Lee Hooker or Jerry Lee Lewis or Chuck Berry or, whomever you could grab, these great iconic unicorns, Bob Dylan as well at the time, to see them perform and how magnificent they were, just in terms of raw energy. And, it was just exhilarating. And that's kind of what keeps me going, I guess, in some ways, is discovery, just a voracious appetite for being inquisitive. And a lot of times you come up against people that will tell you, individuals who will tell you how it should be, and that you've crossed over some lines which you shouldn't be crossing over. And it's like, well, who are you to say? What's your credentials? What are your credentials? Please. What are you basing this upon? It's not a science project.
You hit New York there, and I knew that was kind of important going into this record. I should note that that same year that you all put out Sonic Temple, you were also on Debbie Harry's record, backing her up on Love Light. Speaking of New York, it's hard to get more New York than that.
No, that was kind of strange how that came back. I think it was Rodney Bingenheimer introduced me to Chris and Debbie, and Debbie was doing a record with Mike Chapman, I believe, producing. It was very important because he produced a lot of British glam bands like Sweet, stuff like that. So a great British producer, lauded producer, and it was really interesting being around Chris and Debbie. I mean, an incredibly charismatic couple and incredibly high level of emotional intelligence, certainly authentic. And I was always looking for mentorship. I think in some ways I always really enjoyed meeting artists who were a little bit older than me, that had more experience. I just asked them 1,000 questions. I just was always interested in, I still am, the opportunity to sit down with any artist and who's had a decent amount of time in it and done a good body of work, and you ask them questions, how do they maintain that harmonic balance between creativity and washing the dishes, It's like, I'm going to be a student. I'll be a student till the day I die. I definitely haven't mastered the craft yet, but yeah, it's like you're always in pursuit of that perfect piece, and then you make something you think's really good, and then you listen to it over and over and over again, and you're like, this could change. I should have done it that way, but then you're into something else. So
right.
Just keep moving, and that's, I guess, one of the lessons I picked up along the road was like, don't drive the car looking in the rear view mirror. If you're constantly looking at the past for your answers, you're going to get stuck because the environment's changed, the way we communicate's changed. Being present in the present moment is the real gift. To be able to receive the information and put it through your own filter. And there's an incredible amount of creativity happening right now. It's just everybody is doing something creative. I don't know anybody, certainly in my circle of friends, who are not creatives. All at different stages of career development. Some people have been around for a while, some people are just coming up, all in different fields as well. Photography, art, filmmaking, music, fashion. But they all share the same passion and a desire to create, and a desire to make the world a better place as well, a desire to address what is happening environmentally in society. Everyone seems to be really motivated to get this thing together. And I think that was one of the ideals of the late 60s generation. Certainly Jim Morrison was a sense of communion, unity, ritual space, and create an energy that can transcend, this Western industrial complex conditioning that we're all get stuck in. And I'm very excited about what's happening especially on the West Coast. The West Coast is on fire right now in terms of the energy in LA is incredible. I lived in New York I've lived in New York in the 80s, the 90s, and the aughts, and for different periods of time. Last time I was there for nearly 4.5 years, and New York was, until the glass and concrete went up and rents became insane. New York was it. And New York was Mecca. But LA, I guess a lot of refugees from New York and other cultural capitals started to gravitate towards LA because it was a lot cheaper, easier, cheaper lives. It's definitely changing now, but there's so many galleries, there's so many events. I mean, you're spoiled for choice. Like in my immediate vicinity, I live between the Hollywood Bowl and the Fonda Theater. There's so much going on.
Yeah, when I heard, I talked to Kim Gordon not too long ago, when I heard that, she had left New York for LA and was doing just as much art out there. I was like, oh yeah, no, you could tell that was that's part of the sea change right there. That's a telltale sign.
Absolutely, and that's wonderful because Kim Gordon's a visionary creative, and I really like her paintings. I think paintings are excellent.
Absolutely.
Actually, during when we did Sonic Temple, we were doing a TV show, like a filmed interview. I'm not quite sure where it was, but I was there in like all the dope clothes I was wearing at the time, like totally done out. And they walked out of this interview situation, and I was like, oh wow, such an honor to meet you guys. I love Daydream Nation, and I was just really, I was pretty struck that they were standing right in front of me because I really admire them. And then when the interviewer sat down and said, yeah, I showed them the Firewoman video. I said, did you like it? They were like, no. And I was like, oh, that was a drag. But then again, I understood. I understood why that might not have fit in with their, their view of culture and what it should be. But I think right now we've got to get into a place where artists, anybody who's doing something creative, that we unify, that there's not this kind of, Jesus Christ, intellectual bullying going on. You know, nobody knows more than anybody else. If you're sensitive in any way, you can learn so much from other people and just listen. And you know, there's always a different perspective, and it can enhance your own perspective, your own lifestyle, and affect very positively in the way around you. I used to go out my way to go into environments that were, you know, supposedly off limits. Like during Sonic Temple tour, the rave culture was coming up in the UK, and I was going out to clubs, rave clubs and events. The energy was incredible, and the music was changing as well, shifting. You know, Stone Roses were on the horizon, and Happy Mondays and Charlatans and Spiral Carpets. Primal Scream were doing incredible work, still are. It's a really vibrant scene. Bands like The Orb, just pre-Massive Attack. It was such an exciting time to go out, and that's where the energy was. And I remember going to the Hacienda. Pete Hook actually took me to the Hacienda, and I was like dressed in like leather pants and cowboy hat, you know. And I walked in. I was only like 26 or something. And I walked in, and I felt so old. I was like, what is this? Everyone's wearing like, you know, dope haircuts, sneakers, and I was like, this is like New York. It's just jamming. It's rammed. The energy was incredible. So I'd be sneaking off to these clubs and then going on stage and performing, you know, with the Cult, and then hitting whatever joint we could find, you know, 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and just immersing ourselves in that. Going to hit pop shows, you know. We used to blast NWA through the PA before we went on stage every night. You know, it's like going to set a tone here. This is something we're really into. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of context around the Cult that haven't really, well, I think we're getting more into it now, because we're getting to more, there's a little bit of revisionism going on right now, you know. People are going, they did it first, and going like, well, actually, not quite. They did it after a lot of other people did a lot of incredible work. I mean, nobody has the right to any real estate, cultural real estate in this. Everyone's been influenced by somebody, and that's okay. It's completely healthy to be open to other information than what you deem as, you know, what's going on in your head. It just continues. It continues.
It's not hard to draw, you know, the line from, you know, you all listening to NWA to how The Witch ended up sounding.
Of course.
With the drum loops
and
stuff like that. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
It's not brain science, you know, it's not brain surgery, you know. I mean, yeah, Rick Rubin produced the track. Matt Dyke, who did Paul's Boutique, who was a brilliant producer. In fact, we cut that track. He cut the beats, and I used to hang out in Matt's studio. And in Matt's studio, Santa Monica Boulevard, were Basquiat's lined up against the wall. Because he was friends with Jean-Michel. Yeah, wow. So there's all incredible Basquiat. So that was made in that environment, in this funky studio in Santa Monica Boulevard, surrounded by Basquiat. And the beats kind of came from that. And another song that appeared in '94 called Naturally High. But that was it. We just wanted to get the street sound. I mean, both Billie and I grew up in some pretty rough, industrialized neighborhoods at various times of our lives. You know, sometimes we live in the suburban areas where you get the overspill from the major city situation, but we lived in some pretty gritty places. And when you get to New York, that was such an accelerator of that energy. And, you know, that's, for me, where the energy was. So I loved NWA. I thought they were incredible when they came out. And Public Enemy. And Run DMC. Africa Bambaataa. I love Africa Bambaataa. Thank you to Malcolm McLaren for all that.
Sweet Soul Sister, Wake Up Time for Freedom. You know, when you're talking about connecting the past to the present, it seems like, you know, there's a couple tracks right there, different than what we're talking about musically. That's more thematically. Like, do you see those songs speaking to anything specific today?
Well, certainly archetypal elements in the song. I mean, the idea of a city as a feminine entity, you know, Sweet Soul Sister, the idea of the philosophy and revolutionary culture that has emanated from Paris, post-situationism, the love of jazz music, all these incredible elements that were woven together, and this idea that the city has its own essence, and that's a feminine, very strong feminine energy, and there's a mystique there to that. I think it's a subject I've always been interested in, is exploring, going beyond cognition, you know, the ego's cognition, and moving into much more, I guess, essentially based gathering of information where it's intuitive, and some of these things just kind of grow out of an intuition. I couldn't really break it all down. You know, I'm not a quantum physics scientist or anything like that. So, but it was definitely picking up on the energy and the essences of cities, and also, I guess, cinema trying to create things that were visceral, visually, create visual, your visual cortex would start vibrating with this music as well. And maybe some of the words and the phrases would bring up certain images. But I guess you could link, if you were, clever enough, you could sit back and link a lot of the lines to things that are happening politically and social politically right now in the world. I mean, the idea of Sonic Temple was, for me, was always the idea that, yes, it's entertainment. Yes, it's entertainment. You pay for a ticket, you go through the door, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a moment when all that kind of fades away, when you hit the stage and you can get this sense, this essence of an anticipation from an audience. And there's an opportunity to do something together that night in this kind of ritual space. And sometimes I say to the audience, like, whatever you got to say, get it out right now. Here's your opportunity. Here's your opportunity to be unfiltered and to let it go. And everybody's safe. Everybody is welcome in this space. We take care of each other in our space. I always want to reiterate that our concerts are open to everyone, any walk of life. We don't segregate in that way. So I think that's kind of woven through the songs. Wake Up Time for Freedom. It's just that's like a Buddhist tenet, wake up. A dream, the form is formless, formlessness is form, a dream within a dream. I was picking up more Buddhist texts through the Beats, through Alan Watts, through Timothy Leary, through Ginsberg, through Burroughs, through Joseph Campbell, Hero of a Thousand Faces, the interviews he did with Bill Moyer, The Myth of Freedom, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. It was all this incredible esoteric knowledge that was coming through, especially on public television. These great interviews with Bill Moyers, and I'm just becoming more interested in the architects of the subculture. Like when you actually go, you have your very commercial end with your Woodstocks and all that kind of thing, but you actually look at the individuals who kind of fired this all up. It's like, why do hippies have long hair? Everyone's like, well, they were influenced by Native Americans and that kind of thing. Yes, they were. But one of the big reasons that hippies had long hair is because there's dignitaries from Cuba after the revolution went to Berkeley and they were photographed in Life magazine. I think it was like Camilo Cienfuegos and might have been Che Guevara. They had long hair and beard, and everyone was like, what? They look stunning, and that was a massive picture in life. And then all of a sudden people started to affect that look on the Berkeley campus, the long hair look and the beard and the beatnik kind of thing. And then that just evolved. It just became a cultural trend. And, so there's so many tributaries and points of, entry points. And I'd like to think that some of those have woven through into our songs, and there are layers and there are text. It was intended, there was an intention to try and create something that had layers that could be peeled away, that there's room for discovery in the music, not all of it. Some of it was just pretty blatantly street fight down, it was to create an immediate adrenal response. But I think a great amount of travel and thought and consideration went into it. And we didn't always get it right. It's not. Sonic Temple's imperfect in many ways. It has many imperfections, but it is what it is. And, there it is, the sonic Polaroid of Cult circa 88 through 91. That record, it's created its own space outside of us. People have, so many people I've met at our shows come up and they share what an important record it was for them in their lives, and that it still evokes certain moods and sentiments when they put it on.
It's absolutely fascinating to hear all of these, as you said at the beginning of the interview, you wanted to talk about the influences and to hear how many different types of influences all went in to make this record sound what it did. I mean, it's to me, it's just at its base level, it's a great rock record. But to hear how deep everything goes is really amazing.
No, it's not, even people like fucking Brian Jones, when he went to Morocco, and the master musicians of Jujuku, things like that, and then woven into the beats of Burroughs and woven into like Dyson and Paul Bowles and the literary crossovers and there was just so many. Brian Jones was always a very important figure to me. I always felt that if he'd continued, he would have made some magnificent work. Magnificent, Pink Floyd were a band that I actually saw in 1975, and they were always kind of constantly around. And I never thought of them as an influence, but they've actually been a major part of my life. When I listen to it, I think, how many times have I sat down and listened to Dark Side of the Moon or Animals? I don't know. Thousands, perhaps. Countless. Wish You Were Here. And At My Heart Mother. So it's just incredible. And all that has found its way through, albeit, through our dilettante fingers. We came out of punk rock. What can we say? I didn't go to a music conservatory. We're self-taught, and very much like Tom Sachs as an artist. we throw this together, and it somehow it manages to create it connects in some ways, and it's not for everybody, and I wouldn't expect it to be, but hopefully this tour, I mean, it's been an incredible response because it's selling out. We did the Greek, which was, we did nearly 6,000, I think. The Greek sold that out. The UK tour selling out. The Canadian tour sold out, which for us, we're kind of going, what? What? I mean, we were doing pretty good before. It was like, we were doing good. We were doing like probably 90% across the board in terms of, packing venues out. But this tour has been, I think because we set it up as a Sonic Temple, not the Sonic Temple. A Sonic Temple meaning a Sonic Temple is this place. It's an idea. It requires your participation as much as our performance. Otherwise, it's not just going to come. It's not going to come off. It just won't come off. So, and then it's like I'm just viewing it as like a Sonic Temple, an evening with the Cult revealing the DNA of their influences or something like that.
It's exciting. I do want to see one of these shows. I need to come to the
If you really want to see it, the Greek was excellent. But I think that if you really want to see Sonic Temple in contextual environments, London Hammersmith Apollo, as it's called now, it used to be called the Hammersmith Odeon, where Bowie did Spiders on Mars and Ziggy Stardust. Last concert was done there. That's the place to see it, because that venue particularly was a venue that was very important for Billie and I. We used to go out a lot when we first got together, and we'd go see everybody from Johnny Thunders to Iggy Pop to Susan the Banshees at the Hammersmith Apollo. Incredible venue. And
when is that show?
It's like October the 25th or something like that.
That's totally doable.
26th. Yeah, that'll be a good one. But there's never any guarantees,
Right.
I mean, I remember walking out on the Hammersmith Odeon, one show I did not that long ago, and I ran out stage and my pants ripped open. I was like, oh, shit, you're kidding me. Just into the first song, I actually literally had to run off the stage and find another pair of trousers. And the only trousers I had, other than my stage pants, at the time I could find were like a pair of drop crotch sweatpants. And I ran out and people were like, what is he wearing? And people actually commented like, he looked terrible. He was like dressed in his casual clothes. And it's like, needless to say, know that my ass was hanging out. But that really affected the show, not having the right trousers. You gotta have the right trousers.
Quick note here that I just noticed, by the way, the Doors, because we talked about them so much. A little side note to the interview here. Today is the 50th anniversary of the Soft Parade.
Fantastic. Yes, the monk bought lunch.
The great line. Great line.
What an incredible line. What an amazing line. The monk bought lunch. Yeah. What? That's an incredible record.
It's the best part of the trip.
Best
Ian,
part of the trip, yeah.
This has been so much fun.
Cool.
Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you, sir.
All right. We'll see you around.
Hopefully we'll see you down the road somewhere.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
My thanks to Ian Astbury of the Cults, talking about that 30th anniversary of Sonic Temple. Just a dream interview right there, I tell you what. Hey, before you get out of here, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. Again, you can do it anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. That includes iTunes and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as YouTube. You can subscribe over there if that's more your style. And after that, WFPK.org is where you can find me Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the Kyle Meredith With radio show. I play new songs, anniversary spins, throw some music news in, and of course clips from these interviews as well. It's WFPK.org. ConsequenceOfSound.net has your music and film news. You can also find me at Twitter at Kyle Meredith and Facebook/Kyle Meredith. And that does it for another edition. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.